Coming back to one of our top stories, the unemployment rate remains at 29.1%, and this is according to the latest Stats SA unemployment figures from the last quarter of 2019. Now, the number of people employed increased by 45,000, but 8,000 lost their jobs. ENC's Dimakatso Leshoro is tracking that story and joins us now for the very latest. Dimakatso, a very warm good afternoon to you. Now, just tell us more about those stats mentioned before.
Dumela, indeed, very disappointing if you consider that usually in the fourth quarter we do see an uptick in employment there, but we see that the figures, if you look at quarter 3 and quarter 4, have remained the same at 29.1%. We did see that there was a bit of an increase in terms of the people who are employed, that 45,000 persons that you spoke about there. But I've got with me, the chief economist of Investec, Annabel Bishop, to take us through the numbers. She is an expert to try and decipher this data that we received. Annabel, what is your reaction to these numbers? Is this what you expected?
Hi. Yes, we're actually a bit disappointed because, from a seasonal perspective, we usually see unemployment dip a bit in the fourth quarter of the year. And, of course, staying the same at 29.1. Look, there were quite a few jobs created in the formal sector, and indeed Stats SA puts them at 117,000, so that's quite a lot. But there were 77,000 lost in the informal sector, and of course, such small figures overall that the unemployment rate really just stayed the same.
What does this tell us in terms of how the economy would have performed, perhaps, in the last quarter of 2019?
I suppose it shows that, just from the statistic alone, that there's a possibility it could have performed a bit worse than some have expected. But, if you have a look at this unemployment rate, 29.1%, so high. And, in 2008, we had an unemployment rate of 21.5%. And, of course, since then, we've seen a huge deterioration in economic growth from above 5% to last year, probably close to about 0.3% for the year. And, of course, on that massive downward trend in economic growth, the unemployment rate has risen now at 29.1%, which obviously it was in the previous quarter as well, to what the expanded definition of unemployment was back in 2008. And that includes all your discouraged work seekers. Now this is only the unemployed, excluding those who discourage work seekers, who often are people who don't have enough money to travel to work centres to look for jobs.
But also in terms of consumers and households being under pressure, because as we spoke about the fourth quarter, usually we go out to shop for that festive season, but we're seeing the trade sector actually lost jobs in the fourth quarter.
And that's a big worry for us. Obviously quite broad-based. There's job losses also in the finance sector, and then of course, some concern that it's actually an industry as well, manufacturing, and of course, construction seeing substantial job losses. Look, I suppose over the festive period you do see some layoffs, but this degree I don't think was anticipated. I think it really talks to the point we were talking about earlier. The economy likely is quite weak in the fourth quarter of last year, and there's a real risk it might even have contracted. If you look at capacity utilization rates, for example, if you look at manufacturing, mining, production statistics, electricity production particularly, that have been published to date, there's a concern that perhaps the economy might even fall into a recession if we see a contraction in the first quarter of this year as well, given the fact that electricity production has really been down. We've seen substantial load shedding to date this year, and of course quite a bit last year as well. I'd say the fourth quarter is at risk of coming out around 0%, so that means possibly it could dip into negative territory.
But also a bigger crisis, Annabel, the unemployed young people between the ages of 15 to 24 and up to 35, that group, huge stats in terms of unemployment. Are there solutions in terms of getting young people to work, or are we dealing with that whole structural unemployment problem that we have in South Africa?
So I think, that's the real crisis here. And of course, if we have a look, what did we do previously? Previously, we did see that cohort see unemployment decline quite substantially, the youth. And of course, that is when economic growth rose from, around about 2% to above 3%, but certainly when it was running at about 5% plus. And that very substantial rise in economic growth obviously did make huge inroads into dropping the unemployment rate, as we said earlier, to 21.5, but also dropping unemployment amongst youth. And of course, that's really key, because when your economy is really strong, companies can afford to bring on more youth than they normally would and train them, give them skills, give them, low-level paying jobs, but at least equip them for the future so that, going forwards, they can make huge inroads into the unemployment rate. And, of course, this is the result of an economy that has deteriorated since 2008. And, of course, the real worries are now we're not doing the necessary repair that could create a huge amount of jobs. For example, if we look at the renewable program under the IRP 2018-2019 programs for electricity in South Africa, over 5,000 megawatts could be created quite soon if we implement that program. Of course, a huge number of jobs. And similarly, if we look further afield into the medium term, the next 5 or 6 years, a lot more, up to 30,000 megawatts could be brought onto the grid. These would then help absorb a lot of semi-skilled or skilled people, but also, of course, well, you'd start to see a real demand being created in the economy for jobs and employment. That's just one area. We need to see regulations eased quite substantially. The ease of doing business has deteriorated because our regulatory environment is so onerous. Other countries have improved, we haven't. So on a comparative basis, our ease of doing business has deteriorated. All of these factors really make it much easier for companies to do business in South Africa, would obviously improve the employment rate and make inroads into unemployment.
We are out of time, but just quickly, is there a sense of agency in terms of trying to get young people into jobs from government's point of view? You've mentioned all those problems and challenges that are there.
I would hope there would be, but it doesn't seem as if they're actually doing that much as opposed to just talking about it. So we come up to the sonar again on Friday, and on Thursday night we'll hear about it. Friday will be all the analysis. And of course, from that perspective, there's going to be a lot of promises. But the bottom line is, unless we actually implement these requirements, like National Treasury's growth plan under Tito Mboweni, unless we actually do the implementation, we're not creating the jobs. We talk about it and we discuss what we should do. And of course, there's political factions involved, but we're not actually implementing the necessary reforms to see a substantial change in employment in South Africa.
Annabel Bishop, thank you very much. The chief economist here at Investec. As you heard, Dumelo, not enough being done, not a sense of urgency in terms of dealing with that unemployment problem, especially among young people, and getting the economy to grow. It's back to the studio for now.
Well, thank you so much, Dimakazo. Indeed, those are grueling realities that we're faced with right now as a country, and hopefully come the State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa will give us answers as to how he plans to curb that 29%, which is, of course, the unemployment percentage right now.